Hey guys, welcome back to Honkai Star Rail. In today's video, we're going to be doing a guide for Kafka. Now, I'm going to try and keep it as concise as possible. Kafka is a bit of a complicated character, and there are going to be probably many ways to play her. So when we look at gear recommendations and stuff like that, I'll give you guys the basic build that I would start from and some options that you can evolve to depending on your play style. Also, because it is a new character, new update, we do have a new code, so I'll leave that one in the description as well, so you can go ahead and get the free goodies that come with every new character. So what are we going to look at with Kafka? We're going to take a look at her skills and the way she works. Then we're going to jump into her relics, her light cones, her traces. We'll touch on Eidolons as well. And then we'll go into the teams that she's going to be placed in. So let's get into it. So when we look at Kafka's skill, her basic is fairly basic. It just does a bit of damage. But let's face it, you're not really going to be using that with Kafka unless you mismanage skill points. Her skill, what she does is she's going to attack with a cleave ability. So more damage on the primary target, and the adjacent targets will take a little bit of damage. And what this is going to do is also proc the DOTs, the damage over time effects, whether it be wind shear, shock, burn, bleed on the enemies, and make them instantly do 71% of their damage. And that's at level 8, so it will go up with skill ups as well. But around that 70% of their damage. But that is only going to be on the primary target, so the adjacent targets won't take that additional dot damage. The other cool thing is that it will not consume the dots, it will not take up a turn of the dots just remain there as they were. Next, we have her ultimate ability, which is going to cost 120 energy, and this one's going to deal full board AoE damage to every enemy, and it's also going to apply a shock to them. Additionally, at base, it's going to trigger shocks similar to the way her skill triggers dots, but once we get a trace into it, it will trigger all of those dots very similar to the way her skill does it. Then we have her talent, which basically when an ally uses their basic attack, she will use a follow-up attack on that target. It will also apply her shock dot to the enemy as well. Now, this can only be used once per Kafka turn. So if an enemy uses a basic, she uses it. After she takes her next turn, the next ally that uses a basic attack, she'll be able to do it again. Then for her technique, she's going to attack all enemies around her and enter combat. And then when she enters combat, she's going to deal lightning damage to all enemies and also apply a shock debuff to them. As we look into her traces, the stats that she gains through here are attack and effect hit rate, which are both very important stats for her. So definitely pick those up. And then you can also get some HP if you need the extra survivability. As for the additional abilities that it brings, they're all worth picking up. You're going to get some extra energy when a shocked enemy dies. You're going to get an enhanced base chance of her abilities to apply shock. And you're going to get that one where the ultimate now, instead of only proccing shock dots, it's going to proc all dots on the enemy. As for the skill upgrades in her traces, the ultimate and skill are probably the most important along with the talent. However, the basic skill doesn't really need to be upgraded at all because ideally you're never going to use it. As we move into light cones, her signature 5-star light cone is going to be best in slot, giving her some extra attack, speed, and also an additional dot. However, there are some really good other options if you do have any of them available. First, we have the other 5-star Nihility light cone in the name of the world, which is going to give her some extra damage and also attack. Then for 4 stars, we have Good Night Sleep Well, which is going to give her extra damage based on the number of DOTs on the enemy, and normally we're probably going to have a few to get that amplified further. And then of course we have for Marta, which is going to increase her break effect, which can be very nice on Kafka, depending on the build and enemy you're coming against, but it's also going to increase her damage to enemies affected by shock or wind shear, which, let's face it, most enemies should be having shock when you're using Kafka. And as more of a niche option, which isn't something I would splashably recommend, this is more something if you're playing around with some fun teams where you have another unit with the defense shred light cone, and that would be using before the tutorial mission starts, which was a free light cone we got during the Silver Wolf launch, which increases the user's effect hit rate but also grants them extra energy when attacking an enemy with defense reduction. Once again, this is going to be niche, but I think there could be some fun had with this one. Now we look to relics, and in this one I'm just going to recommend a general build that will work well with basically any team you put her with or or any type of situation you're trying to use her, but I will mention things that you can experiment with if you would like to. So as for the sets, a Band of Sizzling Thunder is going to be fantastic. Due to her using her skill every turn, ideally, you won't really lose that attack buff uptime. The other options you have are Musketeer of Wild Wheat, not as strong on the 4-piece, but you can 2-piece it together with a 2-piece of Band of Sizzling Thunder. And the other one that you can do the same thing with is 2-piece of Sizzling Thunder along with 2 pieces of a Messenger to get that extra speed as well. As for main stat on these pieces of gear, for the body, I would recommend going for attack. However, you can experiment with crit builds, but attack is just going to be an easy, reliable build. And for the feat, I prefer speed. I like getting her as many turns as possible to proc those dots as often as possible. However, depending on the situation and what you're trying to do, attack is another option. As for planner ornaments, the Space Sealing Station is going to be my optimal choice. She wants that attack for her own damage, but also for the dot procking and getting those dots to have higher damage. Now, if you don't have that and you're experimenting with a break build, then yes, you can look at this set. However, in general, if you don't have Space Sealing Station, you can just mix around with whatever you have the optimal main and substats with. As for the main stat on the rope, this one I'm just going to recommend attack. It's once again a very easy one. It's going to work. You're not going to run into any issues, but definitely you could experiment with break effect depending on the type of build you're trying to go for Kafka. And then we have the Planisphere, which this one I'm just going to flat out recommend going for the lightning damage to increase that damage dealt. As for substats, the highest recommended ones are going to be speed and attack percent, increasing the rate at which she can attack and proc those dots and also the damage that she deals. Besides that, break effect is also nice because normally you're going to be taking Kafka against enemies weak to lightning, so you will be breaking and it will add some extra damage. Besides that, you can look for a little bit of effect hit rate, but due to her trace giving her that extra 30% base chance on her application and the extra effect hit rate that she gets through the rest of her traces, if you get around 10% effect hit rate, you'll be pretty safe. So don't try and stack a ton of effect hit rate because she doesn't need too much. But if you get around that 10 just through random stats, you're pretty good. But if you get none and you maximize the speed and attack, you're still pretty safe. Aside from that, if you are going for a crit build, well, you know what to do on that, but that does get a lot more complicated and require a lot better gear. And it's not the general build that I would recommend to most people. And then obviously, if you are struggling for survival, some defense percent and HP percent are going to be nice as well. Now we're going to take a quick look at her Eidolons. Now, none of these are necessary for free to play, so if you don't intend on pulling for them, don't stress, but just so we know what they do for those that do decide to pull for them. At number 1, when she uses her follow-up attack, it's also going to increase the dot damage taken by the enemy by 30% for 2 turns. Then when we get to level 2, while she's on the field, dot damage dealt by all allies will be increased by 25%. No trigger condition, she just has to be on the field. Then at level 4, when an enemy target takes damage from the shock that Kafka has applied, she's going to additionally generate 2 energy. And then at 6, it's going to increase the damage multiplier of the damage dealt by her shock by 156% and extend the duration of shock on the enemy target by 1 turn. As we look into teams for Kafka, there's honestly a lot of options you can do. Kicking it off, if you do have a Silver Wolf and a Bailu, it enables you to use the Ting Yun and then put Kafka in that team, and you have a team that you can bring to any enemy that's either weak to quantum or to lightning, being able to put that weakness on with the Silver Wolf. So that is the Silver Wolf team. Now, moving on past that, we have the team of healer. This Bailu you can swap for a Natasha, a dot damage dealer, which can be either Serval, Luca, or Sampo. Probably Luca and Sampo are going to be the optimal one unless you are fighting against a lightning weak enemy. Then you can obviously get more use out of the Serval for the break capacity, and then putting Asta in the final slot. Now, Asta is going to be a great pairing with the dot comps because she's going to speed Kafka up, also grant the attack buff, and she also has a burn on her basic attack. But that speed buff from Asta is going to allow Kafka to take more turns and trigger the dots more often. However, if you're using Kafka in your other team, maybe to break for fire or something like that, then you can put Ting Yun in this team, and you are running a full mono lightning team if you're running it with Serval as well. Past that, we have the sort of more free-to-play hyper carry option for Kafka, which is running her with Natasha, Ting Yun, and Asta. faster. Basically, we're just allowing Kafka to trigger her own dots and deal the damage. She's going to use her ultimate more to trigger those dots again, thanks to Ting Yun and her ult giving her ult gauge. And this is just a really great free-to-play team for Kafka, in my opinion, that allows you to save investment on those dot characters and maybe wait for a stronger 5-star dot character in the future. But once again, if you do want to play with the other dot characters, there is this team. Once again, you can swap Serval out of this team for any other character that applies a dot that you want to trigger with Kafka. So that is going to be it for Kafka, everybody's favorite waifu. Now, keep in mind, there is a lot more to Kafka, and I will be experimenting with energy regeneration builds, crit builds, and stuff like that in the future for some more fun type content. But like I said, in general, aim for that attack type build, and you should be pretty safe to do well across the board with your Kafka. Best of luck in your pulls, everyone. Hope you get it in 10, and I hope you don't go to hard pity. That's never nice. Thanks for watching. Hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing the next one. Cheers.